Hey ladies, we're gonna talk about women today. The Second Sex is one of the first Bibles of feminism, written by Simone de Beauvoir, I believe in the 40s, 1949. So even though it's been so long, this is still completely relevant to today. Ideas and concepts and arguments, not only have we not resolved them, we have forgotten about them, and we have forgotten how to speak intelligently on this subject. So I think it's really important to talk about this, make this accessible maybe to people who just don't have the time or don't even think that they should be reading this. So I'm not reading phrase by phrase, I'm actually explaining and commenting and just making everything easier to understand. So you know my views, what I've spoken about women before recently. They've been very scattered all over the place, and I think this is a really good moment to pull it all together and make it a bit of a smarter conversation in general. All right, I'm gonna start from the introduction. I hesitated a long time before writing a book on women. I just want to say, every word that I read in this book, I could have said it, and I wish I had. You know, I just feel like it reflects me so symmetrically, so exactly. I love everything about it, from the way that it's written to everything that it says. And I am equally curious about questioning things, and nothing is set in stone, and my opinions also change. But I just wish that I could talk so eloquently. All right, I hesitated a long time before writing a book on women. The subject is irritating, especially for women, and it is not new. Remember, this is written in 1949. Enough ink has flowed over the quarrel about feminism. It is now almost over. Let's not talk about it anymore. Yet it is still being talked about. And the volumes of idiocies churned out over this past century do not seem to have clarified the problem. Besides, is there a problem? And what is it? Are there even women? True, the theory of the eternal feminine still has its followers. They say woman is losing herself, woman is lost. It's hard to know any longer if women still exist, if they will always exist, if there should be women at all, what place they hold in this world, what place they should hold. Everyone agrees that there are females in the human species. Today, as in the past, they make up about half of humanity, and yet we are told that femininity is in jeopardy. We are urged, be women, stay women, become women. So not every female human being is necessarily a woman. She must take part in this mysterious and endangered reality known as femininity. Is femininity secreted by the ovaries? Is it enshrined in a platonic heaven? The model has never been patented. It is typically described in vague and shimmering terms. And I agree with this. Femininity is just all over the place. This is a brilliant sentence. It's borrowed from a clairvoyant's vocabulary. In St. Thomas' time, it was an essence defined with as much certainty as the sedative quality of a poppy. I mean, it's brilliant. But conceptualism has lost ground. Biological and social sciences no longer believe there are immutably determined entities that define given characteristics, like those of the women, the Jew, or the black. Science considers characteristics as secondary reactions to a situation. If there is no such thing today as femininity, it's because there never was. Does the word woman then have no content? It is what advocates of Enlightenment's philosophy, rationalism, vigorously assert. Women are, among human beings, merely those who are arbitrarily designated by the word woman. American women in particular are inclined to think that women as such no longer exists. And she will go into this a lot more later. She compares American women to European women, and I still see that comparison nowadays. it's very different, and I feel like women in America somehow have more respect or can be themselves more. Rejecting the notions of the eternal feminine, the black soul or the Jewish character, is not to deny that there are today Jews, blacks or women. The denial is not liberation for those concerned. This is a very important point, because a lot of the time we want to say equality as if saying that we are equal is going to bring us any difference. For someone to tell me that I am equal to a man, it does not suppose any liberation for me. I am still subjected to being a woman. That is the reality. So that is what we are going to explore here. We can clearly see that humanity is split into two categories of individuals with manifestly different clothes, faces, bodies, smiles, movements, interests, and occupations. These differences are perhaps superficial. Perhaps they are destined to disappear. What is certain is that for the moment, they exist in a strikingly obvious way. And they still exist nowadays. If the female function is not enough to define women, and if we also reject the explanation of the eternal feminine, but we accept that there are women on earth, then what is woman? It would never occur to a man to write a book on the singular situation of males in humanity. Another essential point, because men consider themselves to be humanity. They don't distinguish themselves away from it, but women do. If a woman wants to define herself, first of all, she says, I am a woman. All other assertions will arise from this basic truth. A man never begins himself by saying, I am an individual of a certain sex. For the man, it is obvious. The categories masculine and feminine appear as symmetrical in formal papers, but the relation of the two sexes is not that of two electrical poles. The man represents both the positive and the neutral. Woman is negative, to such point that any determination is imputed to her as a limitation. Everything that we say about woman, if you start thinking about it, they are pretty much all limitations. People say you think this or that because you are a woman. And Simone says, my only defense is to answer, I think it because it is true. Being a man in this world is not a particularity. A man is in his right by virtue of being man. It is the woman who is wrong or different. Woman has ovaries and a uterus. Such are the particular conditions that make us women. Man vainly forgets that his anatomy also includes hormones and testicles. He grasps his body as a direct and normal link with the world that he believes he apprehends in all objectivity, whereas he considers women's body an obstacle, a prison, burdened by everything that particularizes it. So this big sentence, it just means that the man just assumes he's a man the way he is and he belongs in the world in this way, whereas he sees woman as this other thing that actually has the same characteristics. You know, we have a sexual anatomy, we have hormones, but somehow in our case they are always viewed as an impediment, as a limitation, as a particularity. Humanity is male, and man defines women in relation to himself. This is very important because everything that we describe and we see in the world is from the perspective of men. And the thing is, and we will talk about this also later, that women completely accept this as normal. So it's just very interesting to study, and I want it to be clear that I don't think that women are superior to men. I just find this a very interesting study. And I do find, obviously, that women are handicapped, and I think that men should also be reading these things, and I just find it incredibly important and interesting. And also, I find it incredibly relevant right now, because there are so many arguments being posed by a lot of women calling themselves feminist erroneously. I'm very conflicted by that, because I think they're very dumb, and I think it would be much more useful to speak of all these arguments instead of always be speaking of very insignificant or just very specific things such as consent, without taking into consideration everything else that I am saying here. Man thinks himself without woman. Another really good point that we will expand on later. Woman does not think herself without man. She is nothing other than what the man decides. We are called the sex because men see us essentially as a sexed being. For them, we are sex. He is the subject and the absolute, and we are the other. When there are two groups, there's always the group that's considered the one and the group that's considered the other. And the group that's considered the other is always viewed as hostile. There's always a hostility for the natives of a country. Inhabitants of other countries are viewed as foreigners. Jews are the others for anti-Semites. Blacks are the others for racist Americans. Indigenous people are the others for colonists. So what she's trying to say here is that for man, woman is the other. And not only for man, but to humanity as a whole. For every one of us, even for me, woman is the other. Because it's just so deeply engraved in me. I can't separate myself from these beliefs. You assume that the one, which is yourself, is the essential, and you automatically set up the other as the inessential. So for anybody that is the one and the other, the one that you're up against is kind of the one that you don't really need. And this is really true of women. I mean, we are a utility. We are not really useful in any other way. So the interesting question here is, all of these groups where there's a one and there's another, it's very clear that there's this kind of confrontation between them. There's this understanding that there's the one and the other, and they both want to kind of go against one another, whereas with women and men, we don't really want to go against one another. Even if it sounds like we are nowadays, we don't intrinsically, inherently want to go against one another, because we need one another and we love one another. Why do women not contest male sovereignty? No subject spontaneously positions itself as the other. The other has to submit to this point of view of the one. Where does this submission in women come from? Why has there always been a submission in women towards men? In most other cases, for shorter or longer periods of time, one category has managed to dominate the other one absolutely. Often because there's more of them, or there's a law that is imposed. But the thing is, women are not a minority like American blacks or like Jews. There are as many women on earth as there are men. Often, the two opposing groups were once independent of one another, and some historical event subordinated one, the weaker, to the stronger. For example, slavery in America, the colonial conquests. However, In women, they have always been subordinate to men. Their dependence is not the consequence of an event. It did not happen. If women discovers herself as the inessential and she never turns into the essential, it is because she does not bring this transformation herself. Which is another thing that I've always said, not in these very beautifully written, eloquent terms, but the thing that I have in my head is this is up to us. We are the same number of people. Why don't we want to be equal? Because if we wanted to, we would. Proletarians, they get together and they say we. Blacks get together and they say we. They are a community. They know that they are the subjects. Whereas women, except in certain abstract gatherings, and I still agree with this, even 70 years later, we don't use the term we to refer to ourselves as women. Women's actions, and I still agree with this, have never been more than a symbolic agitation. They have won only what men have been willing to concede. So we only get what men are willing to give to us. They have taken nothing, they have received. That is a really important difference. Usually when there is a conflict between two groups, the point is for one group to take something from the other one. Women have never asked to take something from men and have never taken anything from men. We just receive things as favors, as presents. That's a hugely important difference. They, women, they lack the concrete means to organize themselves into a unit that could put themselves in opposition. They have no past, no history, no religion of their own, because we're not separate. We're not independent. They have no solidarity. They even lack their own space. They live dispersed among men, tied by homes, work, economic interests, and social conditions to certain men. So we always have existed tied up to a man. As bourgeois women, they are in solidarity with bourgeois men and not with women proletariats. So what this is trying to explain is that we feel more connected to our people in our social status, be it men or women, than to other women in a different social status. We will always defend and want the best for the people around us, even if they're not women. Women is not a community like all of these other communities where they really feel the solidarity for their community. Women don't. In fact, women hate each other a lot. Okay, this is really important. The proletariat, because it's talking about how the working class overcame the kind of slavery that they were being submitted to. So the proletariat is the working class. They could plan to massacre the whole ruling class. A fanatic Jew or black could dream of seizing the secret of weapons and making the entire humanity Jewish or the entire humanity black. But a woman, we could never dream of exterminating men. The tie that binds her to her oppressor is unlike any other. This is what makes this situation so unique. It just doesn't happen anywhere else. The division of the sexes is a biological given, not a moment in human history. This opposition, it took place since the beginning, and we have not broken it. It's a fundamental characteristic of the women. She is the other, at the heart of a whole whose two components are necessary to each other. So we are the other, we have an oppressor, but we are both absolutely necessary to each other. One might think that this reciprocity, this dynamic, would have facilitated her liberation. There's examples in comedies written and in mythology where the women would try to take advantage of men's need for them, but it is always exposed as a comedy. Biological need, which makes the male dependent on the female, has not liberated women socially. Master and slave is another really interesting dichotomy. They are also linked by a reciprocal economic need, but it does not free the slave. The master always controls the slave, even if the master needs the slave also. The master always controls the slave. This is something that I have argued about a lot, because I've always argued that within master and slave, because the master is meant to be the master, the more important one and the stronger one, the fact that he needs the slave, I always argue that it would put him in a weaker position because he's not meant to need anything, whereas it's okay for the slave to need him because after all he's the slave. But Simone has a really good point here, which is more true, to be fair, and that is in the relation with master and slave. Yes, it is true that the master needs the slave. However, at the end of the day, it is the master who controls. And she explains this very well. The master holds the power to satisfy his need. He doesn't mediate it. The slave, on the other hand, internalizes his need for the master. So however equally compelling the need may be to both, it always plays in favor of the oppressor over the oppressed. Woman has always been, if not man's slave, at least his vassal. The two sexes have never divided the world up equally. Still today, woman is heavily handicapped. Even when her rights are recognized abstractly, long-standing habit keeps them from being concretely manifested in customs. And this is very true, because today, everybody agrees. Every man that you speak to, they agree that we should be equal. Even when her rights are recognized, it's not manifested, because economically, men and women almost always form two castes, and this has changed now, with women getting better paid jobs, and now they get a lot more respect, and they do have their own space to be and survive independently and all of that. But back in the 40s, I guess this was not as obvious. Still, men hold the most important positions. I would say that that is still true. For a woman to refuse to be the other, she would be refusing complicity with man. Most of history so far, the most important figures have been men. So they still have a prestige, because if only of their history, for their history, which is superior. So for the woman to refuse to be the other, she is refusing this complicity that allows her to get into the man's world, which is still better. So refusing complicity with man would mean renouncing all the advantages that this alliance with the superior caste confers on them. And this is still very important nowadays. We want to be with a man, partly because we need to reach, we will talk about this why later, but we want to be in this world which we couldn't get by ourselves, certainly not so early in our existence, but we need to get there early because of our biological needs. We need to have children early and all of that stuff. So we need to very quickly escalate the social ladder, and we can only do this with men. So yeah, this is another point that just blows my mind, just how explicitly and how clearly this is explained. I read the newspaper and this stuff, people don't seem to know this stuff. That's why I'm trying to explain it. I'm sorry if I sound like I am really being pedantic to you. I don't know if everybody's familiar with philosophical texts, and I want to make it accessible to everybody. The man will materially protect the woman and will be in charge of justifying her existence. Along with the economic risk, she eludes the risk of a freedom that must invent its goals without help, because freedom for women has not existed so far, so we're kind of making it up as we go. And it's much easier to just link with a man and get it automatically and not have to assert ourselves. It's the easy path. The anguish and the stress of authentically assuming our existence are avoided. The man who sets the woman up as the other will find in her a deep complicity. And this is a huge thing, because the man knows that by taking a woman in and protecting her and attending to her in every way, he will have a partner forever. And that's a really vital thing, and men want that. And women, we are naturally drawn to offer that partnership, you know? And a lot of women will tell me, I'm sure in the comments or directly to myself, that they love this dynamic. And that's great, but we've got to talk about it. It has to be clear. Even if you love it, this has to be clear, because you can't love it for the wrong reasons. Love it for the true reasons, you know? You like to be a slave, great. I like to be a slave. I don't always want to be a slave, you know? I love to serve, but I need my freedom. And I love to love, and you know, I am the most loving woman in the world. I love men. You know, you guys know that I'm obsessed with men. You know, I just like, woof, just thinking about it makes my heart beat faster. I love men. But I also love women. That is the thing. I also love women. I don't fall in love with women in the same way, but I do love women. A question immediately arises. This is a question that I've been hitting you with the whole time, but how did this story begin? It's understandable that the duality of the sexes, like all duality, be expressed in conflict. It's understandable that if the two succeeded in imposing its superiority, that if one of the two succeeded in imposing its superiority, it has to establish himself as the absolute. It remains to be explained how it was that the man won. Because for there to be an oppressor and an oppressed, there has to have been a point where the man has won over, and it's not too clear how that happened. As I said in my last video, it must have happened through some sort of violence. Like literally the man can rape you, and then there has to be a man to protect you from the men raping you and all that. But I don't like to be so assuming of men's violence. I like to think that men wouldn't necessarily, you know, women also like sex, so I would like to think that the man would just wait for the woman to want the sex and stuff. But that doesn't explain this, because if the woman would always decide what she wants, then she wouldn't have reached a situation of oppressed. So I think there has to have been some violence. I don't know. Why is it that this world has always belonged to men, and that only today things are beginning to change? Is this change a good thing? Will it bring about an equal sharing of the world or not? These questions are far from new. They have already had answers many times. But the fact that woman is other challenges all justifications that men have ever given, because they were only too clearly dictated by their own interests. So all justifications of why woman is the oppressed that men have made up, it's because of their own interests. Males have always and everywhere paraded their satisfaction of feeling they are kings of creation. And this is true, and no man can refuse this. She puts some examples which are pretty frightening. It says that Jews say in their morning prayers, correct me if this is wrong, because I'm not a Jew and I don't know. They say, "Blessed be the Lord, and the Lord of all worlds, that has not made me a woman." And apparently the women Jews say, "Blessed be the Lord for creating me according to his will." And at Plato, he would thank the gods for being born free and not a slave, and man and not woman. But, and this is also a brilliant sentence, males could not have enjoyed this privilege so fully had they not considered it as founded in the absolute and in eternity. So males need to know that this is true and that this is right. Males never want to feel like they are being oppressors. For obvious reasons, you know, because males are nice people, as I said. We like men, we just need this clarification. So if you're a man watching, I hope you understand that we don't dislike you, we're not arguing with you, it's just you probably don't know this either. So the fact is, those who made and compiled the laws were men, and they favored their own sex, which is understandable. And these laws have been turned into principles. So all these laws that started to exist from the beginning of time, they have been turned into habits, principles. So it's just stuff that we accept. It's so ingrained in us. Lawmakers, priests, philosophers, writers, scholars, they have gone to great lengths to prove that women's subordinate condition was willed in heaven and profitable in earth. That is, that the fact that women were the subordinate ones was good for all of us. They have been trying to prove this forever. They are still trying to prove this. Every day there's arguments about this, and at the end of the day, if you bring a good argument, there is just no possible explanation. At the end of the day, the man will just say, well, we are just better. Full stop. They don't even give you an explanation because there's no explanation. They just assume, and we assume too. The women also assume that men are better. And they probably are because, you know, they've had all these privileges for such a long time that inevitably they have had a longer time of education and they can be focused in their own stuff. They don't have to go through all this really confusing paradigm of being a woman. We waste so much time in other stuff. So yeah, they are better in many things. They have more time to be themselves. Whereas women, we don't even know what we are. It's gonna take a while to get out of this. But this is a start. Now, one man said, to explain self-justification, it is much easier to accuse one sex than to excuse the other. The authority of Saint Augustine affirmed, the wife is an animal, neither reliable nor stable. Now you may laugh of this, but this is still a principle that is believed. And this comes out in arguments between couples, for example. You know, when you just start talking shit about one another, the woman is very much humiliated in those arguments. When couples start shouting to each other, not making sense, you can see what the man truly believes, and they truly believe that women are not stable. A lot of them. There's still just so much. There is so much, guys, that we have to get through. It's just a lot. The unmarried woman, interestingly, is recognized as capable of managing her own affairs. Women are not wrong at all when they reject the rules of life that have been introduced into the world. There is a natural plotting and scheming between them and us, he says, and this is very true, there is. And you can read, and this is funny because I read a lot of writings, well, not a lot of writings, but I found curious also the topic of the game, you know, when men, and I have a friend who writes about this, so no offense to any of that, or if there's audience of his watching, but the fact that there exists this whole guide about how to kind of lie to women to get into bed with them, it's an obvious result of this. And I don't think women would care for doing this. There are not that many books where women explain how to manipulate men. And there could be. It's the same thing. You know, how to manipulate men into getting what we want. Can you imagine if the world was full of like commercially and explicitly, stuff like that. All our guides in magazines, they're all about, oh, how to please your man and how to be beautiful for him. It's a completely different world. I'm all for freedom of expression, by the way. I think there could be, you know, I'm all for it. And now we go into a bit of history, because when women entered the labor force, that was a turning point, because women's demands left the realm of the theoretical and they found economic ground. So women were no longer just talking about it. They were actually getting involved in a man's world. And men didn't like this very much. Their adversaries became all the more aggressive. They insist that a woman's place should be in the home, because women were a real threat, because also they were used to such bad conditions and they were used to be paid less. Men tried to thwart women's liberation because women were becoming dangerous competitors. Now, I want to say one thing. There are divided opinions on this, because this may not only be about women, this may be about the lower working classes also. It was only the rich people who worked and had a good job. It wasn't just against women. And for example, with the vote, this is something that not a lot of people know, but nobody could vote. Only the rich people could vote. So it was not only women who couldn't vote, it was also anyone who was poor. But the fact that women are in that group of poor people, like, why, you know? So I don't accept those arguments without question either. And she compares them again to Black Americans, because it's really very similar, the discrimination that has been happening. It's extreme forms of discrimination. It's very different to the Jew, because the Jew is more of an enemy than an inferior. Women are more along the terms of discrimination of Black people, because they were seen as inferior by racists. She says there are deep analogies between the situations of women and Blacks. Now I'm going to go into the analogies of the similarities between women and Blacks, because it's really funny. There are a lot of similarities of how racism was happening. The master caste, they want to keep them in their place. That is the place they have chosen for them. And in both cases, with both women and Blacks, the masters, they praise them for their virtues, the virtues of the good Black or the good woman, the carefree, childlike, merry soul of the resigned Black, and the woman who is a true woman, frivolous, infantile, irresponsible, the woman, after all, subjugated to the man. The woman who is dependent on the man, that is the kind of woman that we are still today praising. Now you're going to tell me, no, today's women are different, they have their own jobs, they have as much money. Maybe, some of them, but the qualities still that are more favored are these classic qualities. So even if you are the biggest empress of your own business, if you have all these qualities of a woman who can also be subjugated to a man, then it's even better. Yeah. The white American relegates the Black to the rank of shoe-shine boy and then concludes that Blacks are only good for shining shoes. Exactly the same thing that happens to women. So they say that women are really good, for example, at doing makeup, and then they say that the only thing we can do is makeup. That's the situation always. When an individual is kept in a situation of inferiority, the fact is that he or they are inferior. And this is what I was talking about when I said that men probably are superior because they have been granted all these other privileges. So yeah, they are superior. They have more education, they have more access to stuff, they have more support by other men and women. We all support men. None of us support women. We say we do, but we don't. day to day, we don't. How many women are you helping in the street? Women go on Twitter and they wear t-shirts saying, oh, women are the best. They don't actually do anything for women. They take pictures of themselves looking pretty and they get together with other models and say, oh, we're supporting women. I'm a woman, I'm an artist, and I can tell you, nobody, especially no woman, has ever supported me or made my life any easier. Quite the contrary. I have been fucked by both men and women, both figuratively and literally, and I have gotten fuck all out of it. To continue. Yes, women in general are today inferior to men. That is, their situation provides them with fewer possibilities. The question is whether this state of affairs must be perpetuated. So, do we want to keep in this situation of inferiority, or do we want to change it? I think it's clear now that we want to change it, but by the kind of things that I'm hearing feminists talk about, they have no idea where they're going. One of the benefits that oppression secures for the oppressor is that even the humblest amongst them feels superior. So even the worst men feel superior to a woman. And I'm going to put an example here. When men are choosing women to sleep with, for example, there is such an imbalance. Like, you see men, even men that can't even support themselves, and they feel like they have the right to sleep with the most amazing women. You can, but it's not like a God-given right to you, you know? The most mediocre of males believes himself a demigod next to women. And this is still true. I'm sorry, it is. There was this guy in 1948, M. Claude Mauriac, who says, "We listen in a tone of polite indifference to the most brilliant woman, knowing that her intelligence reflects ideas that come from us." Now, funny, because for all those suffering from an inferiority complex, this is a miraculous lineament advantage. No one is more arrogant towards women, more aggressive or more disdainful than a man anxious about his own virility. So true, men who don't feel like there are enough men are the worst with women. They are really horrible to women because they are not comfortable with themselves. Okay, I'm getting bored now. Are we getting bored? It's just like I'm explaining so much. I'm going so slow. This is just, and this book is just, there's so much content. Okay, I'm gonna stop here. Women, as we said before, because of women get so many benefits. Not only not benefits, but like they get access to life through men. They're not benefits, they're just normality, you know, neutrality. They get access to living through men, and they can hardly be blamed for not wanting to lightheartedly sacrifice all the benefits they derive from this myth. So women, by continuing this, we are able to live properly, because if we fight it, then we get into so many conflicts that we can't be blamed for not wanting to change it in a way. And then this is true also, and I am really surprised that this was also true in 1949. It says that the majority of men, actually, they don't explicitly make this position of master their own. They don't look at women as inferior. They're too busy with their own stuff. Within the family, the male child and the young man, they see the woman, their mother, as having the same social dignity as the adult male. And this is really beautiful, how little boys love their mothers, and it's true, they do. And their experiences in love and desire, they see the resistance, the independence of the desired and loved women, because they see that their dad, he respects his wife. And she, in married life, she affirms herself opposite him as a free person. So this little boy that grows up as a man, he convinces himself that there is no longer a social hierarchy between the sexes, and that despite their differences, woman is equal. But he does recognize some points of inferiority, especially in professional incapacity, and this still happens in like doctors. Often we want to see a male doctor, we just do. And he attributes these inferiorities to nature. When he has an attitude of benevolence and partnership, he applies the principle of abstract equality. And he doesn't think of inequality. But as soon as he clashes with her, the situation is reversed. So as soon as a woman and a man, even if this man never thought about women being inferior, as soon as there is an argument, he will apply the concrete inequality theme. This is how many men affirm with good faith that women are equal to men and have no demands, but at the same time that women will never be equal to men. And this is why I'm not saying anything against men, because I realize that for men this is also a really confusing subject. This is things that are within us, in all of us. It's not, the man is not guilty of this. This is just how it's happening. We need to talk about it. Let me back up. The thing is, it is difficult for men to measure the enormous extent of social discrimination that seems insignificant from the outside, because men are not women, so they can never understand. The moral and intellectual repercussions are so deep in women that they appear to spring from an original nature. You know, this situation is so deep within us that it looks natural. You don't even question it. It looks like the way we are behaving is just how we naturally are. The man most sympathetic to women never knows her concrete situation fully. And that's why I'm doing this video, because all of my friends are equal women, men rights, and you know, you have conversations with them and they're the loveliest, and most of my friends are male, by the way. But you can never know. You're not a woman, so you can never know. And not knowing, you don't even think of it. And it's interesting to think of it, because there's women all around you. And actually, if you think of it, you will feel more respected, because you will see that women are doing a lot for men, and men don't even think of it, you know, and we really try so hard. And men often feel like they're not getting enough respect nowadays, like women want men to pay for everything and that sort of stuff. And if you just saw all the stuff that we are being subjected to, you will see that this is just not even a conversation. You know, there's deeper problems for us than not paying for a drink. We must also be mistrustful of feminists' arguments. Can you believe that this was written in the 40s? If the question of women is so trivial, it is because masculine arrogance turned it into a quarrel. That's a very important word, because it's not the same fighting for something than having an intellectual, intelligent conversation discussing something. Nowadays, we are just being hysterical. We are not making any sense. It's a quarrel. It has been turned into a quarrel, and I kind of agree that it has been turned into a quarrel by masculine arrogance. They don't give it any importance, so we don't treat it with any importance. So just the perspective that we are fighting from is dumb. We are talking about dumb things. When people quarrel, they no longer reason. People have endlessly sought to prove that woman is inferior, superior, equal, blah, blah, blah. She's obviously secondary. Every argument has its opposite, and both are often misleading, because it's not so easy as black or white. To see clearly one needs to get out of both of these arguments. The vague notions of superiority, inferiority, and equality that have distorted all discussions must be discarded in order to start anew. I agree with this. I think we just can't talk about this anymore. We can talk about equality or superiority or inferiority. It's much more complex than that. We have to talk about situations. We have to analyze. We have to see where it's coming from, why, how we feel about it. How then will we ask the question? I'm going to leave this here because we have gone through a lot. I don't even know if people are getting to the end of this, because I've been talking for a long time, but I hope that it can be useful in some way, because I want us all to think about this, you know, as women and men too. I want us all to just know these arguments, because men, they see women talking in Twitter or, you know, making all these kinds of unreasonable demands and just not making sense. And I want to make sense. This is important. It deserves a good conversation. It deserves respect, to be treated with respect. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you in the next episode.